Husband's estranged sister moved in after claiming abuse. Mother-in-law demanded I cater to her, but I found out the truth after contacting her husband and called the cops. 2 months ago, my husband's sister, Paula, moved in with us. For some context, Jack, my husband, and his sister, Paula, hadn't spoken or been in contact with each other for the past 3 years. While this might seem unusual, once you understand their family background, it will start to make more sense. You see, Jack and Paula grew up in a home that was heavily dominated by their father, Oscar, who was an extremely abusive man. He inflicted the sort of intense abuse you only hear about in the news or read in articles, the kind of stories that leave you wondering how the family ever survived through that. As Jack has explained, a large part of his father's behavior stemmed from a mental health condition. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and managing his condition was a constant battle. He was supposed to be on heavy medication due to the severity of his case, which might have helped stabilize his moods and keep his behavior under control. However, the reality was that most days, Oscar simply refused to take the medication. He would often say he didn't feel like it, which meant his family had to deal with the consequences of his untreated mental illness, intense mood swings, irrational outbursts, and, worst of all, his need for complete control over every aspect of their lives. His refusal to manage his condition and his controlling behavior created a toxic environment that fractured the family. Jack's mother, Cece, suffered the most at the hands of her abusive husband, Oscar, enduring the brunt of his violent outbursts. The abuse was relentless, especially at night when he would come home drunk after work. As soon as he stumbled through the door, his rage would target Cece, and he would start a fight with her for no reason and would beat her savagely. It became a regular occurrence, something that Jack and Paula, even as children, quickly became accustomed to witnessing, though no one should ever have to face such horrors. Cece, despite being the primary victim, did everything in her power to shield her children from the worst of it. She would hide them under the bed and lock them in their room, trying to keep them as far from their father's fury as she could. Jack has confided in me on many occasions about those traumatic experiences, vividly recalling how he and Paula would huddle together on the cold floor, crying themselves to sleep as the sounds of their mother's cries would echo through the walls. The terror they lived in was unimaginable, constantly fearing that each night could be the last for Cece or themselves. Even though their neighbors were aware of the situation, there was only so much they could do. They attempted to help Cece and the kids by calling the police multiple times, hoping to put a stop to the violence. Child Protective Services, CPS, was also contacted, with people concerned about the well-being of the children, but nothing concrete ever came from these interventions. The main reason for this was because of Cece. Despite the brutality she faced, she couldn't bring herself to press charges or officially register a case against her husband. She was very, very afraid of him as she knew what the man was capable of. She was convinced that if he were to be locked up, he would eventually be released and track her and her kids down and kill them all. This fear kept her trapped in the cycle of abuse, feeling powerless to escape. Before you come at Cece, I would like to clarify that my mother-in-law is an orphan, with no family to turn to for support or protection. There isn't a single relative alive who could have helped her out or provided her with a safety net. Hence, without any external help, Cece was forced to endure the violence for years. As for Jack's father, Oscar, his own family was well aware of his condition and they knowingly avoided him. They had carefully hid the truth about him, and since Oscar was taking his medication at that time, there were no obvious signs of any instability or danger during their dating days. Cece never had any reason to suspect anything was wrong. He seemed like a normal, functioning person at the time. However, everything changed once they were married. It was after the wedding that Oscar started to show his true colors when he stopped taking medications. By then, Cece had no way of escaping what was becoming a nightmare. When she later confronted Oscar's parents about his erratic and abusive behavior, hoping to find some support or at least an explanation, they were disturbingly dismissive. Instead of offering help or acknowledging their son's serious issues, they told her it was none of their business anymore now that he was married and that he was her problem now. When Cece threatened to leave him, they discouraged her from doing so by saying how every man uses physical violence from time to time during their marriage, and that this was something she simply had to accept to become a good wife. Worse still, they planted the idea that it was her responsibility to change him, that somehow her patience, love, and endurance could fix his mental illness. Unfortunately, Cece was young, naive, and without any family support. Having married early, she didn't have the experience or the resources to recognize just how dangerous her situation was going to become. A few months into the marriage, she also became pregnant with Jack. With a baby on the way, she had to leave her job, further isolating her and making her financially dependent on Oscar. This dependence only tightened the chains of her entrapment. When Jack was born, Cece's circumstances grew even more harrowing. As a first-time mother, already overwhelmed by the new challenges of caring for a newborn, she continued to suffer under Oscar's abuse. This resulted in her mental and physical health deteriorating rapidly. She was heavily depressed, battling the weight of motherhood without any support system, while enduring the relentless violence from her husband. Oscar showed no concern for her well-being, either as his wife or as the mother of his child. Instead, he became enraged if she didn't meet his unreasonable demands. Like, if she didn't prepare a hot meal every night or keep the house spotless according to his impossible standards, he would beat her without hesitation. Her exhaustion, her depression, none of it mattered to him. Cece has confessed to me how Oscar would find new, twisted ways every day to punish Cece. For example, he would sometimes deliberately starve Cece as a form of control and humiliation. Before leaving for work, he would lock the kitchen, preventing her from accessing any food throughout the day. He knew she didn't have money to buy fast food either. By locking the kitchen, he wanted to break her spirit in addition to her body. Oscar did leave the baby powder out for Jack during the day, so his son could be fed while Cece would stay hungry the whole day. Only when Oscar came back home would she be allowed to go into the kitchen just to cook a meal for him, even though she had been starving the whole day. When Cece became pregnant with her second child, Paula, she decided that she had enough of Oscar's abuse. She needed to escape for the sake of both her children and herself. At this point, she had no money, was heavily pregnant, had Jack, a small child who depended on her, and had nowhere to go for help. There wasn't a single family member or friend she could turn to, and Oscar's control over every aspect of her life left her with few options. Cece didn't have much of a plan, but in her desperation, she decided that she would take her passport, grab Jack, and run to a nearby motel. Once she got there, she planned to contact a domestic abuse helpline and try to secure a place in a shelter. Unfortunately, fate was not on her side. Oscar, always controlling and suspicious, had installed a front camera at their door to monitor everything. Without Cece knowing, he had been tipped off by the footage of her leaving the house with Jack. Cece, without any money for a cab, had been walking down the street, holding Jack's tiny hand, when Oscar caught up to them. He was furious, and violently snatched Jack away from Cece. Then, he threatened to kill their son if Cece didn't return home with him immediately. He knew how to manipulate her deepest fears, and nothing could be more terrifying for a mother than the thought of harm coming to her child. With Jack's life in danger, Cece had no choice but to do as Oscar demanded. That night, back at home, Oscar beat Cece mercilessly, punishing her for daring to try and leave him. He took away her phone and her passport and warned Cece that, if she ever tried to run again, he would kill her and the children. Cece was trapped in the worst possible way. This is why she never had the courage to register a case against him. As Jack and Paula grew older, they started to see and understand more and more about the dysfunction and horror in their family. Initially, they were scared, helpless children. But as they became teenagers, something shifted. They began to learn how to stand up for themselves and for each other. Jack, in particular, grew fiercely protective of Cece. As the eldest, he felt a deep responsibility to defend his mother, and would often put himself between his father and her during confrontations. This would sometimes land up with him getting beaten by his father, but he didn't care as he just wanted to save his mother. As Jack grew older, he started to stay up late, waiting for his father to come home drunk so he could take care of his father instead of letting his mother handle him. The moment he heard the front door creak open and Oscar stumble inside, Jack would spring into action. He would serve his father dinner, and keep him distracted and calm. After dinner, Jack would help his intoxicated father stumble to the couch, where he'd switch on the TV, ensuring Oscar was too preoccupied to disturb Cece or Paula. His efforts were all about keeping his father occupied enough so he wouldn't lash out. Jack would wait for his father to drift off to sleep, knowing that only then could he relax. As you can imagine, living like this shaped Jack in profound ways. The burden he bore was immense. No child should have to take on the responsibility of managing an abusive parent or protecting their family from harm. Yet, Jack did it night after night. It robbed him of his childhood, forcing him to grow up far too quickly. When Jack received the opportunity to attend a prestigious university with a full-ride scholarship, it was a bittersweet moment for him. On one hand, it was a dream come true, a chance to finally escape the suffocating violence of his father. The scholarship was his ticket to freedom, a way out of the cycle of abuse that had controlled his life for so long. But on the other hand, the idea of leaving behind his mother and sister weighed heavily on him. Jack had spent years protecting Cece and Paula, and the thought of abandoning them to face his father's wrath alone filled him with guilt and fear. Paula, especially, was terrified at the prospect of Jack leaving. She had always relied on her big brother to protect her. She begged him out of desperation, knowing that without Jack, She and their mother would have to face their father's abuse alone. However, Cece understood that this opportunity was Jack's chance to break free and build a better future. She encouraged him to accept the offer and reminded him that he deserved to think of himself for once. But Paula didn't share Cece's optimism, and when Jack finally decided to leave, she deeply resented him for leaving her behind. Paula's own path was very different from Jack's. While Jack was academically gifted and secured a full scholarship to an excellent university, Paula struggled with school. She had dreams of attending her own dream colleges after high school, but things didn't work out the way she had hoped. Academics weren't her strength, and instead of fighting to find a way forward, Paula decided to drop out of college to start working for a fast food chain restaurant where she earned minimum wage. As the years went by, Paula became increasingly bitter towards Jack, because of their differences, refusing to even maintain close contact with him. Whenever they spoke, she would complain about how miserable her life had become without him there, and how he had selfishly left them all alone. Meanwhile, Oscar had gotten sick over the years due to his constant drinking. Years of heavy drinking had caught up with him, and he was from swollen kidneys, a condition that left him in acute pain. He needed constant medication to manage his illness, but the family's financial situation had always been dire, and they simply couldn't afford the necessary treatment. With no money for medicines, Oscar's condition continued to deteriorate rapidly. A year before Jack was set to graduate from university, Oscar finally passed away. The man who had inflicted so much pain and fear on them was suddenly gone. I can only imagine the relief the entire family must have felt. Fortunately, Oscar had left behind the only asset he had, the house in Cece's name, ensuring that she and the children would at least have a place to live. This was a small but significant blessing. For the first time in years, Cece could live in peace without the fear of being terrorized by her husband. She slowly worked on rebuilding her life. Despite not having been part of the workforce for decades, she found a job as an assistant at a small boutique shop. Though the pay wasn't much, it was enough for her. When Jack graduated from university, he secured a high-level job with an excellent salary. He was now finally in a position to help the family he had left behind. Hence he began sending money home every month. For Cece, Jack's financial support was a godsend. The extra money from him along with her job and Paula's job allowed them to live more comfortably and without the constant worry of financial strain. It was during this more stable period in Jack's life that I first met him. I found him easygoing and attractive. When Jack first asked me out on a date, I had no idea what he had been through. But as we got closer and I started to learn more about his history, it absolutely broke my heart. I couldn't believe that someone who had experienced so much darkness in his early years could still be so kind, so full of love, and so open to the world. 3 months into our relationship, Jack introduced me to his mother, Cece. I remember being a little nervous, but Cece quickly put me at ease. She was kind and upfront about their family's history, just like Jack. Meeting Cece and hearing her story only deepened my admiration for Jack. I saw how much strength and resilience ran in their family. Both mother and son had survived so much. But while Cece and Jack were kind and welcoming to me, there was always a noticeable distance with Paula. From the beginning, she never really warmed up to me. Paula remained emotionally distant and never spoke much to me. Shortly after Jack and I began dating, Paula decided to move out. At the time, she had been dating a guitarist who played in a band that traveled around the country, doing small tours here and there. Paula seemed completely in love with him and was determined to follow him everywhere. Jack and Cece both tried to reason with her, advising her to reconsider. They wanted her to think more carefully about the future and whether following a musician on the road was the best choice for her. But Paula didn't pay heed to their advice and left. Over the years, Paula's decision to follow her boyfriend on his band's tours led to her drifting apart from her family. Her nomadic lifestyle meant that she didn't stay in close contact with either Cece or Jack. Cece would occasionally receive a postcard from Paula, short, impersonal updates about where she was or what she was doing, but Jack never got so much as a reply back. He tried to reach out several times, but it seemed as if Paula had completely distanced herself from him. A year ago, Jack and I got married and Paula didn't even bother attending. Nevertheless, me and Jack have built a life together in a home we bought together as a couple. Both of us have stable jobs that pay well, and we're happy with the life we've created. Cece lives in the next town over and visits us from time to time, but for the most part, we all have our own independent lives. However, about 2 months ago, everything changed when Cece called Jack with some unexpected news. Paula was returning back home. According to Cece, Paula had called her in tears after a bloody fight with her boyfriend. She was terrified, scared out of her mind, and she didn't know where else to turn. Cece wanted to help her daughter out, but there was a problem. Paula's boyfriend knew where Cece lived, and there was a real fear that he might show up unannounced, and these two women could not really protect themselves. Hence Cece believed Paula would be much safer staying with us. Our home was in a different town, and Paula's boyfriend didn't know our address. Cece felt that Jack, being the older sibling, would be able to keep Paula safe. When Jack first brought up the idea of Paula moving in with us, I had to admit that I was hesitant. It wasn't just the fact that Paula and I had never really had a proper conversation. I could literally count the times she had spoken to me on one hand. Now, this woman who had barely acknowledged me while I was dating Jack, was suddenly going to be living in our home indefinitely, and that thought made me uncomfortable. I understood she was Jack's sister, and of course, family is family, but I couldn't help but feel uncertain. There were so many unknowns. How long would she be with us? Would things be awkward? How would her presence impact the life Jack and I had built together? To add to my anxiety, Cece called me herself, not just to explain the situation but to essentially demand that I allow Paula to move in and cater to her needs. She insisted that her daughter was severely traumatized, and I needed to help her out. I could hear the desperation in her voice. Cece was clearly in protective mother mode, and she wasn't willing to take no for an answer. While part of me felt overwhelmed by the pressure, I also understood that Cece was just doing what any mother would, fighting to ensure her daughter had a safe place to heal. I didn't want to disappoint Cece or Jack, so, even though I was hesitant, I agreed to let Paula stay with us. When Paula finally arrived, I expected her to look like a mess after the way Cece had described her situation to us, but surprisingly, she looked completely healthy and well. She seemed really happy to meet us after so long. After Paula settled down and had dinner with us, she finally opened up to me and Jack about her marriage. She confessed that her relationship with her boyfriend had turned into something awful, eerily similar to what she had watched her mother endure with their father. Apparently, shortly after leaving home, Paula and her boyfriend had married impulsively, and it was then that the abuse began. Her husband started abusing her, both physically and emotionally, and she had felt trapped, unable to escape. She wanted to run back home, but she foolishly kept giving the guy more chances. Eventually, he had beaten her up so much last week that she came almost close to dying. That is when she had finally reached out to Cece for help. Paula broke down crying, as she recounted her story. I will admit that I looked at Paula's face and hands at the time and noticed that there wasn't even a single scratch on her body. It really confused me at the time as it didn't match what she was telling us. However, I didn't want to question her and make her feel uncomfortable. Jack immediately reassured her that she was safe with us, and I nodded in agreement. He promised her that she could stay as long as she needed, that our home was her home, and that no one would hurt her again. For the past 2 months, Paula's stay with us has been a mixed experience. At first, we just let her be since we knew she had been through a traumatic experience and wanted to give her some space. However, as time went on, I began to notice troubling patterns in Paula's behavior. She drinks frequently, and while moderate drinking is not a problem, her overconsumption is alarming since she is a nuisance after she is drunk. She often comes home late at night, completely intoxicated. There are nights when we receive calls from bartenders asking us to pick her up because she has passed out at their establishments due to too many drinks. Jack has been providing Paula with a weekly allowance for her personal expenses, which she uses to spend it only on drinking and partying with strangers. She frequently brings home people we don't know. There have been several instances when I'd walk into the kitchen only to find an unfamiliar man rummaging through our fridge, looking for something to eat as if this was their place. I started to feel incredibly uncomfortable and unsafe in my own house. I tried to encourage Paula to find a job, to help her regain a sense of normalcy, but she always came up with excuses like she isn't in the right state of mind to work. Yet she has had no issues when it comes to partying and socializing with people. This is why I started to get very suspicious about her behavior and questioned to myself if she was really depressed or was just simply using us for our kindness. Jack didn't appear to see the problem though. He was sympathetic to Paula's struggles and believed that she needed more time to get back on her feet. While I understood his compassion, I was also getting more and more frustrated with each passing day because of her troubling behavior. Hence, in a desperate bid to understand what was really going on with Paula, I decided to reach out to Paula's husband, Arthur, directly. I figured he might shed some light on her behavior and whether or not her claims about their relationship were true. I found Arthur easily through his band's popular Facebook page. I sent him a direct message, asking him to call me on my number. My plan was simple: if he confirmed Paula's account of abuse, I would work to be more understanding and be supportive of her despite the challenges. But if the truth was different, I needed to know. When Arthur finally called me on my number, he revealed something very contrary to what Paula had made us believe. It turns out that it was she who was abusive in their relationship, and not the other way around. Arthur described multiple incidents where Paula had behaved erratically and violently. He recounted times when she would lash out at him in front of friends in public spaces if she ever saw him talking to a female friend or a fan. Her jealousy and suspicion led her to regularly check his phone and confront him over minor interactions. She would start fights without warning, throwing empty alcohol bottles at him. The physical abuse had escalated over time, and 2 months ago, Paula had tried to strangle him with a pillow, out of nowhere, while he was asleep. Arthur lost consciousness from the attack, and when he woke up, Paula was just gone. Arthur was really shaken up and admitted that he felt deeply ashamed and embarrassed to report the abuse. As a man, he felt that coming forward with these details would be seen as a weakness, and he was just thankful that she had decided to leave him. However, he had begun consultations with a lawyer to initiate legal proceedings against Paula since he did not want to stay with her anymore. He had reached out to Cece to find out Paula's location so he could serve her the papers, but Cece had pretended like she didn't know where her daughter was. I asked Arthur if he had any proof of what he had just revealed to me. To substantiate his claims, Arthur immediately sent me medical records and photos documenting the abuse he had endured from Paula. He also had screenshots of Paula apologizing to him after each of their fights, where she had in fact begged him not to leave her. The evidence was hard to ignore, and I was floored by the devastating truth. His version of the truth explained a lot about Paula's behavior, which I had already suspected. Arthur warned me clearly that Paula was not in the right state of mind, and with her pattern of behavior, she was clearly a threat to live with, since her violence could turn towards me or Jack anytime. After talking to Arthur, I haven't been able to think properly. I no longer feel safe with Paula in this house. However, I do not know how to break the news to my dear husband who loves his sister so much. I don't know for sure how he is going to react. This might end up causing a huge fight. Am I the a-hole if I reveal Paula's truth to my husband and she might get kicked out? Update 1. I posted this yesterday and then went to sleep thinking I might be able to talk to my husband in the morning with a much clearer head. However, in the middle of the night, Jack and I woke up to loud noises coming from downstairs. Jack and I rushed down to find Paula arguing loudly with a stranger. The guy was shouting at her to let him go while Paula was hurling every insult imaginable at him. Jack managed to calm Paula down and asked the man what was going on. The guy had a gash on his head and was also bleeding from his lips. Broken plates were scattered everywhere, which Paula had thrown at him in the middle of their argument. The man explained that he had met Paula at a bar that night and they had a few drinks together. She had then invited him back to her place, but after coming to our home, he had fallen asleep from exhaustion. However, he suddenly woke up to Paula trying to straddle him and pulling his pants down. Instinctively he pushed her away and started to yell at her about what she was doing. She giggled at his reaction, still clearly intoxicated. Then, when he tried to leave, Paula kept blocking him, saying that he was not man enough for her. This resulted in both of them arguing loudly and Paula throwing things at him in anger because he was refusing to do anything with her. He begged us to let him go, threatening to call the police if we didn't. Without hesitation, I replied that I would do him the favor and reached for my phone and called 911. I explained the situation to the dispatcher and requested medical assistance for the injured man. Jack kept telling me to disconnect the call, saying it was just a small misunderstanding, but I told him he didn't know the whole story. Later, when the police arrived, Paula was arrested since the man was visibly injured because of her. No amount of begging saved her this time. After the whole thing, I did confess to Jack everything that I had learned about Paula and how she had turned out exactly like their father, abusive and controlling. Jack obviously did not want to believe me until he saw Paula's husband, Arthur's medical records and photos that he had sent me. Jack couldn't argue with me after that. Since then, he has been awfully quiet and hasn't talked to me much. I am sure he is still trying to process the truth about his sister. Update 2. Alright, it's been a month and a half since my last update, and a lot has happened. First off, Paula is now in jail. Arthur finally took action and filed a domestic violence case against her, using the evidence he had. With both a domestic violence and battery case against her, Paula was sentenced to 6 months in jail and required to attend mandatory anger management counseling. Cece and Jack are both deeply affected by the situation. Cece denies knowing anything about Paula's abuse towards Arthur. They are both very much sympathetic towards Arthur for everything that he has been through. Despite everything, they don't hold me responsible. Update 3. Hello. It's been 3 months since I last updated and I still get DMs asking for any updates. To answer some of your questions. Paula is still in jail. No, Jack and Cece haven't gone to meet her. Instead, they have decided to cut all contact with her. Yes, I do agree that Paula might be suffering from a mental health condition just like her father, and hopefully after she is freed, she can work on herself. Arthur and Paula did end up getting divorced, so Arthur is finally free from her. Now with Paula gone, I feel much better and safer in my home. I am glad I listened to my instincts and called Arthur that day to find out the truth about Paula.